What up?
What up, man? How you doing?
Good. First try.
Yeah, I know, right?
This shit never works.
Always normally takes a few.
Yeah. Okay. Let's rock and roll. I think, let's see. So it gives us all the questions in the chat box. So I don't know if you have seen that. So when you put it in your story and they answer the questions, if you go down on here and hit that little question icon on your phone, can you see it?
No, I don't have it on mine.
Oh, well, you don't have it because I'm the one with the call on. Okay,
That makes sense.
no worries. We'll get through. We'll see what we got here. Okay. Well, oh, we've got 26 people on already. Cool. So thanks everyone for joining. We are going to do Q&A today. So we had put up question boxes in our stories. So these questions are going to be from those boxes primarily. So we will kind of get into that here and see what we got going on. Okay. All right.
What's up, Kevin? Let us know if you have any questions.
First one, asking about carb and fat timing. Does it even matter for body composition goals when you're eating 5,000 plus calories?
No.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think I would even venture to say you could maybe even say less than that, you know?
Yeah, I think once you're getting up into those higher amounts, there's so much overlap between digestion, every meal, absorbing nutrients that it's not. For me, most people are going to have trouble eating once they bridge that like 4,000, 5,000 calorie gap. So it's just like get it in where you can get it at that point. Like I don't have a problem giving someone fats post workout or something like that. If calories allow for it, if they're that high.
Yeah, I think really food selection is probably more of a concern at that point. Like making sure that you're still getting at least minimum, some nutrient dense foods in there and you're not just eating a bunch of processed junk to get your calories in. And then essentially beyond that point, having protein in every feeding and spreading things out throughout the day to, to hit your needs. And I think that's going to be sufficient for the vast majority of people.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah. That one's pretty straightforward, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
for sure. In contest prep, moderate refeeds with slight decreases in activity to drop fatigue. So I guess if they're asking if that's something that we preference. And I feel like we've talked about this before, like this idea of not just refeeding heavily, but refeeding a little bit more moderately and decreasing activity as a way to drop fatigue. So essentially, you're still kind of shifting calorie balance because you're burning less calories via cardio normally, or even like taking a day off of training, depending on what your setup's like, and then refeeding more moderately instead of just trying to keep all the activity the same and refeed as many carbs as you can. Because I don't know about you, I used to do that, like especially back when I was starting, because I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get more carbs today, but if I train harder, if I like train even harder today, I can like eat even more carbs, and
Yeah.
it's just not it doesn't really trade off like that, like you think it would on paper, because refeed should be a lot about dropping systemic fatigue.
100%. I think it just also depends like where you're at in the prep. For me, obviously, I'm gonna start adding in more refeeds if we can, like deeper into the prep, and that's where you would see something like reducing activity, or sometimes, I'm a fan of multi-day refeeds. So like the first day we might train, second day might not even train and have the same amount of carbs as the first day, if not a little more. And normally I see, a good drop in weight after that too.
Yep. I do that a lot. I'll do, if it's a 2 day, like one of the days they might not train, like one of the days they might not do cardio either.
Yeah.
We'll just, maybe one of them's a complete rest day with the same, with the higher food still. Yeah, I do something very similar.
Yeah, the cardio thing, something I've been doing a lot is like on those refeed days, just like no cardio.
Just drop it.
Especially with those individuals who the cardio is higher. I find like if it's like 20 minutes, I'm probably just gonna leave that in. But with the people who it's higher, I normally either pull it out completely or slash it in half.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
100%. At least like a pretty large reduction for
Yep.
sure. So holding phases before prep, yes or no? And I'm not sure exactly what all they're referring to, but
All I can think of is like maybe like maintenance or something like that. I don't know what a holding phase is.
well, I could think, I mean, I would say if you are enhanced, then maintenance phase before prep would be a good idea from that standpoint, from supplementation standpoint, not like going into the prep already on high doses because they're going to escalate as the prep goes on. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one. From a food standpoint, I don't necessarily think you have to be at maintenance. I mean, you can certainly just drop from a surplus into prep depending on where you're at. I don't know that that's necessarily mandatory, but the things that you probably do want to be around maintenance at are like fatigue, right? So like fatigue levels, depending on how you're training and stuff, you might want to deload or drop your down to maintenance volume for a little bit, supplementation back to maintenance, like all that stuff. But from a food standpoint, I don't know, it's probably not crucial.
Yeah, if anything, that might actually like be less beneficial, possibly. Like if you're
Right,
going from like a surplus and then just going right into maintenance for depending the period of time.
right. Yeah, some people will do like the prep for the prep. I mean, I would say that if you are really, really fat and you need to
Yeah.
lose a lot of body fat, then you might have to break it up into chunks like that. But that's kind of a different conversation. Okay, where am I going here? All right, someone asked about shoulder tendonitis and working around or rehabbing shoulder tendonitis. When you so let's like rephrase that question because I think there's a way to maybe encompass all types of those injuries because really tendonitis is not a tear. It's not like a torn muscle or a torn tendon or a detachment. It's that the tendon is inflamed, right? So I think a better question would be when you are having recurring inflammation of a tendon, whether it be elbow or shoulder or something like that, like, how do we navigate that?
What I find
What do
is,
you think there?
so I actually had, this is years ago, I had tendonitis and then turned into tendinosis, and I had bursitis on my left shoulder. And this was probably 7 years ago now, 8 years ago. But like I went from, doing 100+ pounds on an incline dumbbell to not even being able to do 20. It hurt so bad,
Yeah,
like just stabbing pain. And the biggest thing I noticed was one, time off. Two, like you said, controlling the inflammation. But what it normally is there's normally like a missing link in your training. Like you're probably doing something wrong in your training, and that's what it was for me. It was just like improper. I don't want to say like necessarily form, but just for my body, I have to do like a different mechanics for that, and then I
yeah,
pretty much just rebuilt from the ground up, and then retaught myself how to train, and I haven't got it since.
yeah. It could be like machines or different things mechanically don't really suit your structure very well, or the way you're setting up the movement doesn't. Or sometimes it's just that you have a muscle somewhere in that chain that's weak. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're getting an over, like for example, if you're getting an overuse issue where you know, your bicep tendon at the top of the insertion by the shoulder is hurting all the time, it's probably not a shoulder issue. There's probably something weak in the musculature, and it's a compensatory issue, something that's compensating, right?
Yep.
So like normally when an area is affected, you have something down or up that chain somewhere that is either weak or impinged or tight, and it's not allowing you to, perform the movement correctly. So like I know I get work done periodically by, Matt Christman is, guy who lives in Florida. He does a lot of the IFBB pros and stuff.
I
So
know
he
you're
does
talking
like,
about.
yeah. So Matt and I have been friends for a while, and he's come up and done a lot of work. And something that we really focus on, and I learned a lot from him, was most of these things are referral pain. Like the pain's always like referring from somewhere, like a lot of us sit at our desk and we're hunched over and things. And a lot of like lifters, they get that front shoulder pain, like that typical like front delt pain, whether it's bicep tendon, rotator cuff, labrum, like different parts of the shoulder. And he's like, well, a lot of the time it is your lats or your rhomboids or your supraspinatus on your back or on your shoulder blades are tight and things like that. And once he actually releases those, shoulder stops hurting. So, pay attention to overuse issues in other areas, right? Yep, I think that's
I
a
agree.
good takeaway. Oh, we've got a semaglutide question again.
I'll let you handle that one.
Man, did you see? So I won't go too far down. I won't go too far down the rabbit hole on this, but there's been a few articles dropping about some of the issues going on right now. So it's not looking too hot.
Yeah.
Not looking too hot right now.
And they're coming out like crazy. I think even like Bill Campbell just did one. He like posted one a few weeks ago, having to do with it as well.
Yeah.
But they're coming out like crazy.
Yeah. I think it was inevitable. And I would just say it happened quicker than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I
remember we talked about it like on like one of our calls like some time back. I remember you said like it was only going to be like amount of time, and that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, and it's like the drug has been around for a long time. I don't think people realize that because it was used in for type 2 diabetics and different for that type of modality, but it was never. I don't think it was necessarily intended to be used at such high dosages and titrating up, and people abuse shit. So, but they asked, semaglutide for hunger and prep, does it limit nutrient uptake due to the slow digestion? So it's not going to have anything to do really with the way the body is absorbing nutrients, but it will slow down gastric motility, meaning the muscles in the stomach, the peristalsis that occurs that are kind of contracting and moving stuff through the GI tract will slow. So I suppose indirectly, and I don't want to make a full statement, but I suppose indirectly there could be probably slower nutrient absorption just from the simple fact that the digestive process is slowed. But eventually everything's going to absorb, assuming that you're not taking so much that like people are puking and throwing up and stuff from it. So, but I suppose in a low dose, enough to take the edge off in hunger and prep, it's probably something that could be feasible with minimal issues. But I'm personally not going to sit here and suggest it. So,
yeah, same here.
Yeah, it's not. No, and another thing is like I don't want to sound old and cranky, but people have been prepping and getting in shape for a long time without a lot of things. Like I've prepped people that, and I'm not talking people that just have good metabolisms and get in shape easy. I'm talking about people that like have to grind. I mean, like there's natural athletes that don't use anything other than like some yohimbine HCl and like stuff, and they get peeled. So
100%.
It's just like you gotta suck it up sometimes.
Suck it up, put in the work, and just like do what you have to do.
I think too that when we get so focused on trying to find outs like trying to find these little hacks and shortcuts that we do get a little distracted by the work that we have to do, and like putting in those steps, it almost stresses you out more than it should, you
Oh,
know?
100%. Yep.
So here's a good one. Someone asked me this and they DM'd it to me because it wouldn't fit in the chat box, but they said they had a client that lost 30 pounds. Then they went on vacation, I'm assuming vacation, to Mexico and gained 15 pounds back. And they asked, would you, and of course we don't have the context, but like, would you put them back into a deficit, or would you go ahead and proceed with the gaining phase? I'm sure that's what they had planned, as they were probably getting ready to transition into a surplus at that point. And um, what do you think in that situation? I mean, I have an opinion on it.
I see this shit literally all the time,
Right.
and as you know, like I think what people fail to realize is like when they do that, like obviously like they're eating up here, but their body's still adapted to this. So it's just like fat is just accruing, you know what I mean? Because that's not good weight. Uh, for me, I might spend like a week just to like clean it up a little bit, get whatever, like, because obviously that's not all fat. A lot of that's going to be water. Drop as much as the water as possible. And then from there, I'm just going to take it slow. You know what I mean? Just try like, check blood glucose, try to make sure insulin sensitivity is good. I'm not going to drop back into a deficit because chances are like they're not going to drop the same way. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you see that when people do that post show and then they want to do another show and they're like, why is the weight not coming off? And it's what I just said. It's like, well, you're adapted to, you know, let's say it's a woman, like you're adapted to, by the end of your cut or your prep, you're adapted to like 1,300 calories, and now you gained 15 pounds. Like, where is there to go? The only place there is to go is more cardio or less food, and just
Right.
shooting yourself in the foot at that point.
You have, you're exactly right. You basically, and people, and some people also make it seem like, oh, you couldn't gain fat that quickly, and like bullshit. You definitely, even on a week's vacation, if you're pretty down regulated going into it, whether it be prep or you've been losing, even not even prep, but like losing 30 pounds is a pretty good amount of weight to lose consecutively. So you got to assume that you're probably down regulated some, so you made a really good point in that when you're overfeeding like that and you're gaining that fat back, in order for you to get that fat back off, you would have to essentially go back down to where you were at or lower to get it back off, because you've not really restored any of that metabolic or hormonal function during that week period or whatever it was. So like you can absolutely gain fat pretty quick, and I would do exactly like you said. I mean, I'd probably just chill around maintenance for a week or so and see how much water and inflammation come off. Maybe we lose, 5 to 8 pounds of that weight back off. And then once we kind of find that set point, bring them back up. And chances are it's like this weird thing that happens in your head, like adherence is going to be trash too,
I was
because
just gonna say that.
yeah,
They can even make it
because
that 1 week.
you shot yourself in the foot, man. Like you went off track, and then you came back fully expecting to start eating, raising your calories and all this, and you're just not in that same mindset anymore, and it's over. It's over at that point. Yep, for sure. Were you able to pull up any questions?
Yeah, I have like a few DM ones.
Yeah,
I was able to pull
we'll
up.
hit those.
One of them was how likely is it for a natural bikini competitor to get a pro card, and what advice will you give her through the process? I'm pretty straight up with people, and I'm like, at the natural level, like it's pretty fucking hard. Like you have to be top tier genetics. Personally, I've had two bikini competitors turn pro like entirely naturally. But especially like year after year after year, it's just getting harder and harder and harder to get to that top level. And on top of that, like normally like that, those people are pretty fresh. They haven't been in the sport for very long, so their bodies respond super well. And they naturally had, a good amount of, muscle to begin with.
Yeah, agreed. It's not impossible. If there's any division you're going to do it in, I mean, that's going to be the one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's it's not like it's not like you couldn't get in shape, because there's definitely natural bikini athletes that get in shape. It's just
Sure.
from it's just that a lot of people, they don't have as much muscle as they think. So when they diet down, like, they lose their glutes, they lose their hamstrings, they lose their quads, because they didn't really have them to begin with. You know what I mean? Like, there was just fat on top of them. So they just getting enough muscle is going to be the difficult part, more so than anything else. And also, if you're taking a bunch of cracks at it like that, your hormones are going to eventually shit out at you.
Yep.
When you're taking multiple cracks at it, it's it's going to be pretty unlikely. Um, and even if they get it early on, in order to continue to be competitive, there's probably going to need to be at least some light
100%.
support in there over the long run to continue to sustain that and continue to make progress.
100%. And for me, I'm like, to each their own, but I'm like, if I know someone wants to continue after turning pro too, at that point, like you said, instead of taking multiple cracks at it at the national level, like, just go whichever route's going to be healthier for that person. Because as we know, like, employing some PEDs can actually be healthier than going at it naturally. Um,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
if they're open to it, going that route.
Yeah. And it's not like you need anything exorbitant to
Exactly.
necessarily continue to progress in that division. I mean, you shouldn't, and if you do, it's probably not the right sport for you.
Yep, I was just going to say that. If you do, it's either like, you know, that person has a coach that maybe not know what they're
Doing
doing,
something.
or they just
Yeah.
don't have the genetics for it, and that's plain and simple.
Yeah. And most people aren't patient. They really don't have the patience and foresight to continue to take, like, 2 and 3 year off seasons between
Oh, for
shows.
sure.
And, like, how often does that happen?
Or like the ability to stay in it for that amount of time. You know what I mean? Like, to
Yeah.
stay focused for 2 to 3 years. Um, Another one I got was, how do you know when your program is too much, quotations, during a prep? Um, I'm going to assume this means like pushing too hard. We talked about this the last one, I remember. Um, to me, this is going to like be just like looking at stress. Obviously, I had someone reach out to me very recently, and they're like, hey, I'm like 5 weeks out. I don't look how I should, and they didn't. And their calories are at like 600, and they're at like 3.5 hours of cardio. I'm like, that's straight out of the gate. Like, you're just digging yourself in a hole, like a big hole. Um, like, that's way too much, obviously. Now, if you're on like that borderline, like, it's like, what is too much? Some people think 1,200 calories is too much. You know what I mean? And for a specific person, it might be. For someone else, probably not. I'm looking at how the body's responding. I'm looking at the stress component. And the biggest thing here is like, how are they responding? Are they not responding? Am I giving them a refeed and they're responding after the refeed? If so, stress, probably got to look at that stress and figure out, where to optimize this program at.
Yeah, it's not a lot of people, like you said, they base it too much on a number or an amount of something. Like a female can't go below a certain amount of calories, or a male, or even a male, like
Mm-hmm.
even a guy, right? And that's just not true. It's just not it just really depends on what happens when I make those changes. Because if I'm having to dig hard with somebody, but it's working, then that's a whole different thing than me making multiple sets of changes and nothing happening. Or, like you said, you know, you get someone that comes in late in the prep like that, and they want you to maybe guide them through. I mean, one of the first things I'm going to do is what happens when I try to pull some stress off and refeed them? Do they just retain like every little bit that I give them, or do they actually have a positive response and dump some retention? Because if they do, we might have we might have a little bit to play with there,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
But you're gonna know. I mean, if once you make those changes, if it's just like instantaneous retention and everything sticks to them and nothing good happens, then you're like, all right.
You got to pull the plug at that point.
Yep.
You know, another example is I had someone not that extreme, but like kind of in the same boat. She came to me about like 5 weeks out. I was like, look, you ain't gonna make the show. Like, push it back. You know, well, first let's start this. If you get a positive response, we'll push it back. You know, maybe a month. Literally just like lower cardio, increased food, dropped 5 pounds. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
to the point you were saying. And from there, I just kept doing the same thing. And next thing you know, there's 10 pounds off eating, 800 calories more.
Right.
And at that point, like, yeah, let's proceed and then drop back down and just mitigate stress, like a little teeter totter. You know what I mean? Give, take.
Right.
But yeah, like if it's like to the extreme where it's clearly unhealthy, like obviously that's too much. But again, it's context. There needs to be context. Like obviously, like if you have a short, let's say a woman who's 100 pounds or 90 pounds on stage and she's 4'10", you know what I mean?
Right.
1,000 calories is going to look a lot different to her than a class
Sure.
stage girl who weighs 140 pounds. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. I had that conversation recently about the whole calorie thing. I'm like, you got to realize some of these female competitors have a whole like 80 pounds of lean body mass when you strip it all down.
Exactly.
It's not like there's that much there to feed them, to feed essentially. So I'm not 1,000 calories on somebody like that is not really, I mean, that's still, it's still like 12 to 15 times their body weight or 12 to 15 times their lean body mass in calories. It's not really low.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you definitely can't quantify it that way.
Yep. Agreed. Those are the only ones I was able to pull up.
Let me see if anyone else dropped anything else in the chat. Man. Oh, shit. Apparently my thumb is too fat here and I can't keep clicking on it. God damn it.
I'm trying to scroll through this.
Yeah, I know, but I keep clicking it. I don't see any actual questions on this. I put the chat box up kind of late, so I had like 6 questions, but that was only about an hour.
Yeah. All right, there's one. What are the PEDs you would put a female competitor?
Oops. Oh, there we go. I lost your audio. So what are the PEDs you would put a female competitor on who max out naturally?
Yep.
That's what they're asking.
That's
question.
What the question is. Yep.
There's a few routes. There's a few routes you can go. There are non-androgenic things that could potentially serve as a benefit. Things like carnitine, growth hormone, even growth hormone and insulin synergistically could be beneficial without being androgenic. But I'm assuming they're probably more interested in the androgen side. And I will say that a couple considerations. One, probably just going on like the traditional 5 milligrams of Anavar every day might not be the best first route for everyone. I mean, I know a lot of people that's kind of like the standard starting point.
Yeah,
I think the most important.
A lot of people think that's gonna like put so much size on, and I'm like, no, it's not. But
yeah, and also I think it's important to think about to like kind of understand total androgen load a little bit. So if you think about 5 milligrams a day of something of an androgen, that is 35 milligrams a week, right? So if we were to compare that to testosterone replacement, which again, this is not like a 1-to-1 ratio, but we would see something like maybe 5 milligrams a week would be a replacement dose of testosterone for a female. So you don't you don't necessarily have to start super high with dosing. Secondly, um, you can use aromatizing compounds. A female could use testosterone as that could be like a first, even like a first option. I know that's taboo to some people, but women make testosterone. We kind of know how much they make naturally. Um, it will provide estrogen, right? Because we have aromatization. So like that could even be a viable option. I'd want to know too, like, are we talking contest prep? Are we talking off season? And what divisions and what kind of time frame are we in? Because you could potentially do a pretty low dose, like first exposure, if you will, and ride that out for a while and probably make some pretty good progress without needing anything too extreme. Even used, like SARMs, especially Ostarine, pretty successful with women. I've had good success with that, with little to no disruption in menstrual cycles. I really wouldn't vouch for any of the other SARMs, just mainly that one. That's the one that tends to have the most research and I'm most comfortable with. But there's a lot of options there. But I think just like men, you should explore multiple pathways if you can, right? So instead of just being like, we're going to start here, and then when this doesn't work, we're just going to keep increasing our androgens. Like there's IGF, growth hormone, insulin, like all these pathways still work in females. So, those are things to consider for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I'm pretty much on the same page. For me, I like to start with non-androgenic, like we were saying, um, and kind of just like see where the response is there. I see great response with that, especially like in an off season. Uh, and then when it comes to, other compounds, I'm looking at the blood work. Like, let's say their test level is at 8. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to make more sense to use like a replacement dose of testosterone, um, and just ride that. And you see great progress with
Right.
just the replacement dose of testosterone.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's like Primo. As you said, there's Anavar. I'm not a big fan of using Winnie. Um, just not a big fan of using that with women. But yeah, pretty much the same thing as you.
Someone asks, is it possible for a 40-plus-year-old to gain muscle and achieve peak conditioning to do well at a show? And yeah, I mean, a 40-year-old can definitely get in condition.
Mm-hmm.
Whether a 40-year-old can gain muscle probably depends on a lot of factors. The biggest factor as you get older is how long have you been bodybuilding and how much of that potential have you really tapped into? Because, like, for example, I have a guy right now that is doing the Masters Pro show out at North Americans, the one that they do on the weekend after the
Yep.
amateur stuff. But he's like 65-ish, but he turned pro in 50, I think in 50 and over, or it might even have been 60 and over. But at the same time, he started competing in 2007, not 1987,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, of course, he has made progress in his later years and been able to get into condition. I mean, the conditioning thing you can do for a pretty long period of time. It's just the muscle gain. Really, a lot of that it is age dependent, but it's also dependent on how much muscle have you gained throughout the course of your competitive career. Because, like, I know personally, by the time I'm certainly not going to be gaining muscle when I'm 50. But I've also been bodybuilding since I was like 16 or 17. You know, like I'm probably going to be pretty much maxed out well before then.
Yep. I agree. I mean, I know for me, like I've had guys who've started with me at like 38 years old and they turn pro at like 42. I mean, there's significant amount of muscle put on in that time. But like you said, like they didn't start when they were 16. They started when they were mid 30s. So there's still that sense of like beginner gains there to a sense. Yeah, I mean, like
Yep.
you employ some drugs, like you make sure they're healthy, and you can see pretty big differences. But then take like an open guy who's getting into his like late 40s. I mean, he ain't putting on no muscle. You know what I mean? So yeah, just like you said, I mean, it's definitely possible though, for sure.
Yeah. Yep. If you start late enough, it's possible. Women, I mean, women too. You see that in the IFBB. Like women, I mean, some really good female competitors have been pretty old.
I
You
have
know?
a I have a bikini pro. I won't even say her name, but she does pretty well, and she's 42, and everyone thinks she's like 32, and she's like
Right.
nasty. Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
just proves it.
You've seen that in, I mean, you've seen it even in like women's physique and female bodybuilding because you've seen them into their 40s and even like 50s even in some of the female bodybuilders, but also the important thing to understand there is yes, they're muscular, but what you have to do to maintain the muscle compared to an open guy is is more sustainable, I guess, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. It
Yep.
might not be sustainable at all. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of women that crash and burn at like 25, right? But also some of these guys in open they're so gassed out that by the time they're 30, like 35, there's nowhere to go, and
Yep.
they fall off.
At
But
that point, it's just like trying to like lower the chance of injury at that point, and just like how long
yeah,
can you go? Yeah.
yep, fine tuning anything if you possibly can, but the conditioning thing for sure. No reason as long as you can get everything functioning halfway decent that you can't get into shape. I mean, go to Masters Nationals every year. You'll see it.
Yep.
You'll see plenty of guys that are peeled. They tend to just start losing, like tearing stuff and losing and atrophying mainly. I think if you can turn pro at over 40 if you still have legs. That's what I'm banking on, dude. I'm banking on having some quads and hamstrings
And
and
then you're
hitting
there.
masters.
Yeah.
That's funny. Cool. I think that's it, brother. I don't have any more questions unless anyone else has any. I don't think we missed any.
Yeah, that's all I got as well.
Cool. Yeah, we'll call it. We'll call it there. I'll get this reposted. Thanks everyone for joining. So I will reshare if anyone wants to watch this. Thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Of course, man.
And I'll throw up a tag for you too.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, buddy. Have a good rest of your night.
You too, man. See you later.